I love how you just said mode of baptism. So I'm unique again among 1689 Baptists in the sense that we will receive a sprinkling infant baptism. So we have multiple members of our church, adult members, not just speaking of their kids, but adult members of our church who they themselves were baptized in a gospel preaching church as an infant. And what we will, even our statement of faith. So we have two statements of faith by design. We have what we call our general statement of faith, and then we have the church's specific statement of doctrine. General statement of faith, specific statement of doctrine. The specific statement of doctrine, as it currently stands, is the 1689 Second London Baptist Confession of Faith. And that is, we have very specific language in our constitution of the church that says that each member of the church must recognize the specific statement of doctrine that is the 1689, but that they're not required necessarily to affirm it. And we bifurcate what it is to recognize versus affirm. Recognize means that they're not going to be visibly and audibly, vocally divisive over it. And they would come to expect that the public preaching ministry of the church would be within the theological guardrails set forth by the 1689. We do require officers of the church, any ordained officer, which for us, the diaconate would be an ordained officer of the church, and we would hold to a male diaconate, just as we hold to a male eldership. But male elders and deacons ordained by the church, they are required not only to recognize, but also affirm the specific statement of doctrine that is the 1689. But members of the church only have to recognize that specific statement of doctrine, 1689, but they must affirm another statement of faith, which is our general statement of faith, and it's just that. By design, it is general. It is so intentionally narrow that no non-Christian could affirm it. A Muslim cannot affirm it. A Buddhist cannot affirm it. An atheist cannot affirm it. A Roman Catholic actually would not be able to affirm it. But a Presbyterian can affirm it. An Anglican can affirm it. A Baptist can affirm it. An Arminian could affirm it. A Calvinist could affirm it. Continuationists could affirm it. Cessationists could affirm it. And so we're intentionally having the statement of faith that requires prescription from the members of the church intentionally broader. And so what it says in regards to baptism is it simply says that in order to be a member of the church, you must be a baptized follower of Jesus. And it makes intentionally no mention of mode. And so what I do with that Presbyterian family, that because churches are few and far between right now, because we're in a time of war, not a time of peace, and solid covenantal, reformed, theonomic, postmillennial, Kuyperian churches don't currently grow on trees. When a family like that finds themselves in our geographic area and they're looking for a church and they can't find a Presbyterian church like ours, and they want to be members in our church, I simply ask them, do you believe that your infant baptism of sprinkling in terms of mode, do you believe that that was a legitimate baptism? And if they say yes, then what I say is, in order to obey the teachings of Scripture in Galatians, one baptism, one Lord, one faith, I say, well, I am not comfortable as a pastor subjecting you to sinning against your own conscience by subjecting you to what your conscience would see as a second baptism. And so we're going to say that we have a difference in mode, but that we both have a baptism. And so therefore we welcome them in as members of the church. Now, what I'm not currently able to do in my own conscience is that even if the parents' conscience had their own children and wanted them as an infant to receive infant baptism, pedobaptism, the parents' conscience would be clear, but I could not actually practice that baptism as a minister. And so I have a Presbyterian minister who is close by, who we have a good friendship with. And so I would actually send them over to him to receive that infant baptism and then come back to us and the membership residing with us. And so that's how I'm navigating it right now. And again, this is not for anybody, because I know you and I are both going to get pushback from this episode as relativist or whatever, which we're not. But again, my position is I'm not saying that this was a good position to hold 200 years ago. And I'm not saying it's a good position to hold 200 years from now, as I believe with my heart of hearts that Christendom was stronger 200 years ago And I believe that Christendom will make a comeback 200 years from now. But in this unique moment that we're living in, what am I going to tell them? That this couple comes, and I'm not saying there's no Presbyterian church, but this is what they have to choose between, Joe, and you know this better than I do. They have to choose between the Presbyterian church in town that's radical to kingdom, Thomistic, not presuppositional, no room for Van Til or Bonson or anything like that. So they have to choose between a church that is Reformed and that is Paedo-Baptist, that will baptize their children, but then will disciple their children to have no influence in culture whatsoever. And to not seek to restore Christendom, to not seek to engage culturally with all of Christ for all of it. And so what happens is that the parents, they're like, we can't do that, Joel. We would rather be in a Baptist Kuyperian church than a Paedo-Baptist pietist church. We see pietism as actually a bigger threat to our children in the long run than a church that won't baptize them. But then the parents sit there with their conscience uneasy, and I can see it as they're in terms of their conscience, they're foregoing what they see as a commandment from the Lord to choosing not to baptize their children. So I send them over to my friend in town so that their conscience can be at ease, but then they can be a part of our church. And that's just, I don't know what else to do in this current moment. I don't think it'll always be the case, but I think it's currently where we're at. And I know that a lot of my 1689 friends would say that I'm compromised on this issue, but I think that that history will look back and say, yeah, what Joe and Joel were doing in that moment, given the larger context, what was at play was not the ideal position, but probably the lesser of the poisons to choose from.
Well, I don't think that's a compromised position at all. I think that a compromised position, the experience that you're talking about of people coming to the church who are from a Paedo-Baptist background but cannot stomach the retreatism, pietism, sometimes antinomianism in the perhaps the Paedo-Baptist environment around the corner was something that we dealt with. We had migrants from, for example, in terms of response to lockdowns, there were people that came to us from Presbyterian environments because they just could not deal with the compromise anymore. What do sort of hardcore credo or Paedo-Baptist people on either side of the aisle who will not bend and flex on what is ultimately a secondary issue in situations of critical missional importance are going to do with families like that? Just turn them away. And I think you make a critical point that you cannot force people's consciences. And actually, what you described as your practice is exactly what we did at Westminster. When I said that my ideal would be able to follow the conscience of the parents, that was not what we were able to practice because of our desire to be faithful to the community, the Baptistic community that we were part of. That it would be, to be a bridge too far to do that. But we did have situations where we had Reformed Presbyterian families in the church who had a child, or they were Dutch Reformed, and they were in the church, and they wanted their child baptized. And so we helped with arrangements for that to happen. But they continued to be worshippers, members at our church. And I think that that's what in terms of the broader unity of evangelical Reformed believers who love the Lord, love his covenant, and want to love and serve one another in a time of war, as you say, I think this is important. And until at the end of the day, look, we know, and this is really my last remark on the issue, but we both know that there are godly, faithful, covenantal, Reformed, and if you want to add some of the other distinctives, theonomic, optimistic eschatology, so the post-mill, presuppositional, Kuyperian. You can add all of these additional descriptors on both sides of this discussion. And I think that many of these issues, that are like the one you mentioned there, for example, like a two kingdoms issue today, to my mind, is a much more critical and vital issue for the church at war than the mode of baptism. And I think that until we are in a time of peace, where if the Lord would grant it, we could come to one mind on the mode and timing of baptism. Until that time comes, I think we have to develop ways of building unity in the local church on this issue. Because as you say, the churches that are truly faithful and committed to the Reformed faith today are increasingly scarce. And those that will be prepared to confront prophetically culture and engage all of, as you said, all of Christ for all of life in its totality, and take the totality of his word seriously, they're not growing on trees. So what are we going to do with our faithful brothers and sisters in those different environments? Surely the attitude of Christ, the attitude of the apostles would have been, I think, the one that, without wanting to, place ourselves on the side of the angels automatically, I think that's the one that would have been pursued by the apostles, were this question a matter of division in their time. This is a secondary issue where godly men and women of faith and truth and like commitment have differed for centuries. And we're at DEFCON 3, possibly DEFCON 4 right now in the West. So this is surely not the time to focus on division over secondary issues when we've got the battle of a lifetime to struggle with for our children for the future.